I woke before dawn that morning, though I couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the stillness. The kind that presses against your ears like the pause before thunder. The air had that cool, heavy weight it gets just before sunrise, and the forest smelled damp and alive. I pushed myself up on one elbow and glanced around the tent. My friend Kyle was still asleep, snoring softly under his blanket, but something felt off. The fire pit outside had gone cold hours ago, yet I swore I smelled earth and fur, something wild and close. I unzipped the flap as quietly as I could. The first light was just filtering through the trees, long grey fingers stretching over the clearing. That's when I saw them, prints, massive ones. They circled the tent in a wide loop, pressed deep into the soft soil. The shape was unmistakable, a bear's forepaw, claws and all, larger than my open hand by far. My breath caught in my throat. I followed the pattern with my eyes and saw more leading toward the creek where we'd washed dishes the night before. "Kyle," I whispered, shaking his shoulder. "You need to see this." He grumbled, then froze as soon as he caught the look on my face. When he crawled out beside me, his expression shifted from confusion to awe. The tracks were everywhere, between the tents, along the edge of camp, even near the cooler that we'd hoisted into a tree. It must have come in the night, maybe even while we slept, padding quietly around us under the moonlight. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the rush of the creek and the faint chatter of waking birds. My pulse hammered in my ears. Every shadow in the woods suddenly seemed alive, every branch a shape crouched low. Then Kyle let out a shaky laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess we had company," he said. The fear began to drain away, replaced by a strange sense of wonder. This was its home, after all. We were the visitors. We moved carefully, whispering as we packed up camp. No loud clanging of pans, no sudden movements. The prints led off into the trees and curiosity tugged at us like a rope. From a safe distance, maybe 50 yards down the trail, we spotted movement near the berry patch at the base of the ridge. Through the morning haze, a shape emerged. A black bear sow with 2 cubs tumbling around her feet. She stood broad and calm, nose lifting to test the air, while the cubs wrestled and rolled in the grass. The fear that had knotted my stomach softened into something humbler, quieter. Watching them there, framed by sunlight streaming through the pines, I felt a deep respect. They weren't monsters or threats, just a family trying to make a living in the same wild world we'd borrowed for a night. We stood in silence until they vanished back into the forest, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the fading echo of cubs' playful huffs. We didn't speak much as we finished breaking camp. There was something sacred about that quiet, like talking too loud might shatter the spell of what we'd just witnessed. I coiled the ropes from our food bag while Kyle folded the tarp, both of us glancing occasionally toward the trees where the bear family had disappeared. The forest had gone back to its regular rhythm, chickadees hopping from branch to branch, a squirrel scolding us from high above, and the rhythmic drip of dew falling from pine needles onto the leaf litter below. But now every sound carried new weight, as if we were hearing the woods for the first time. We'd camped in bear country before, Yellowstone, the Adirondacks, even once in Montana. But never had we been that close, that included in their world. Knowing that Mother Bear had walked right past our tents while we slept sent a chill down my spine, but it wasn't fear anymore, it was awe. A kind of reverence for just how small we really were in that endless web of life. When we shouldered our packs, the sun was breaking over the ridge, painting streaks of gold across the clearing. The damp ground steamed faintly. As we walked toward the trailhead, our boots occasionally crossed over the bear's tracks. Each one was a perfect impression. The curve of claws, the weight of her stride, even the faint slide marks where she'd shifted her paws. I found myself matching my step beside hers, wondering what she'd been thinking as she padded through camp. A little further on, we stopped at the edge of a meadow filled with waist-high grass and clusters of wild blueberries. There they were again, mother and cubs, maybe 200 yards out this time. The cubs clambered up a fallen log, one tumbling off the far side while the other perched proudly at the top. The sow was busy stripping berries from a bush, utterly calm, utterly herself. We crouched low, behind a thicket, binoculars forgotten. Watching with the naked eye felt more honest somehow. Kyle whispered, "She doesn't even care we're here." I smiled. That's kind of the best part. For half an hour, we just stayed there, barely breathing. Time stretched thin, the way it does in moments you know will stick with you forever. The cubs wrestled in the sunlight, squeaking and snorting, and every so often, the mother would rumble, a deep, patient sound that carried easily across the meadow. Eventually she turned, her black coat glistening, and led them toward the deeper woods. They moved silently, effortlessly, until the shadows swallowed them whole. When they were gone, the forest seemed to exhale. We stood up slowly, brushing off pine needles, and the world resumed its motion, the buzz of insects, the hum of wind through spruce. "You know," Kyle said, tightening his pack straps, "I think I'll take paw prints over alarm clocks any day." I laughed softly, nodding. "Yeah," I said, "but next time, let's make sure the coffee's hung in the tree." We followed the trail in companionable silence for a while, the kind that only comes after something profound. The morning had fully bloomed by then, sunlight filtering down through the canopy in shifting patches that danced across the ground. Our boots made soft sounds in the loam, and every once in a while, a jay would dart across the path, blue wings flashing like scraps of sky. The air smelled of pine sap and damp moss, sweet and earthy. I remember thinking how small we must have looked from above, two figures moving slowly along a narrow trail through a wilderness that stretched for miles in every direction. After a mile or so, the path wound uphill, tracing the side of a ridge that overlooked the meadow. From up there, we could see the faint movement of shadows below. The bears again, now tiny from the distance, like black ripples on a green sea. The mother was leading her cubs along a game trail toward a thicket of berry bushes. They paused every few feet to sniff and explore, the cubs bouncing at her heels. We sat on a flat rock and just watched. Kyle dug into his pack and handed me a granola bar, whispering, "Breakfast with bears, huh?" I grinned, trying not to crinkle the wrapper too loudly. The wind was gentle, just enough to carry the scent of pine needles and the faint sweetness of the berries. Down below, the cubs clambered up a dead stump, one after the other, toppling it over in a puff of dust. Their mother turned her head slightly but didn't interfere, her patience steady as the earth itself. There was a moment then, one of those rare flashes where time seems to stop. The sunlight caught the sow's fur, turning it into a soft shimmer of bronze and black. The cubs froze, both standing upright, sniffing the air. I could feel the tension ripple through me, that primal awareness that somewhere between curiosity and caution, two worlds were brushing edges again. But she didn't mind us, not really. She just looked our way for a heartbeat, massive head lifting slightly, and then went back to her cubs. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realised I'd been holding. "She knows we're here," I murmured. "Yeah," Kyle replied, "and she's letting us stay." We sat there until the sun climbed higher and the bears finally melted into the deeper forest, the cubs' playful sounds fading into rustles and chirps. The world seemed quieter afterward, but not empty, just balanced, like the woods had shifted back into their natural rhythm after letting us glimpse something private. Eventually, we stood and began the slow walk back toward the car. My shoulders ached under the weight of my pack, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I couldn't stop replaying the sight of that family moving together, calm, deliberate, without fear. Somewhere between the trees, I felt a quiet understanding settle in. We hadn't just been near wildlife that morning. We had belonged to the wilderness for a little while, and it had allowed us to leave unscathed. By midday, the forest had taken on that shimmering stillness that comes when the sun hangs straight overhead, and even the insects seemed to pause in the heat. Our pace slowed to match the lazy rhythm of the day. The trail cut along a small creek, its water clear and cold, sliding over smooth stones that glinted like bits of glass. We stopped there to refill our bottles and rest in the shade. The air buzzed faintly with life, dragonflies hovering like tiny helicopters, frogs croaking somewhere under the ferns, the far-off drumming of a woodpecker echoing between the pines. We didn't talk much at first. I think both of us were still digesting the morning, each lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, Kyle broke the silence. "You ever think about how close we came to never knowing they were here?" he said, tossing a pebble into the water. "Like, if we'd slept a little longer or packed up quicker, we'd have missed it completely." I nodded, watching the ripples fade. "Makes you wonder how many wild things we pass by without even noticing." He smiled, a little crookedly. "Probably for the best in some cases." We both laughed, but it was a quiet laugh, the kind you share when words aren't really enough. There was something grounding about it, about realizing how vast the world really is and how small our slice of it can feel. For so long, trips like this had been about the adventure, the hiking, the fishing, the campfire stories, but that morning had stripped all that away. What stayed with me wasn't excitement or even fear. It was humility. After we'd rested, we followed the creek downstream, sometimes walking right in the shallow water where the mud was too thick to navigate otherwise. The cold bit pleasantly at our ankles, and the rhythm of our steps blended with the burble of the stream. Every once in a while, I'd glance at the soft banks and spot faint tracks. Deer, raccoon, and yes, another bear print here and there. It felt like reading a secret journal of the forest's nightlife, each mark a passing sentence written in mud. We stopped again at a bend, where the creek widened into a calm pool shaded by an old cedar. I dropped my pack and sat on a flat rock, trailing my fingers in the water. The reflection staring back at me looked different somehow, calmer, smaller, in the best way. Kyle skipped a few stones and said, "You know, it's kind of funny. I used to come out here thinking I was escaping the world, but now it feels like I've been walking through it blind this whole time." I smiled. "Guess we all need a bear to wake us up now and then." He chuckled, and the sound carried lightly through the trees. We stayed there until the shadows began to stretch again, the day cooling into late afternoon. Somewhere out there, the bear family was probably bedding down too, full from the berry bushes, moving through their own rhythm of survival and rest, and I couldn't help but feel in that golden stillness that we were part of the same story, just quieter chapters written side by side. By the time we reached the trailhead, the sun had begun to dip behind the ridge, pouring long shadows through the trees like dark rivers of ink. The air cooled fast, one of those crisp mountain evenings when the warmth drains away all at once, leaving a hint of smoke and pine sap in its wake. I could already picture the world we were heading back to, paved roads, neon signs, the hum of engines instead of cicadas. But for the moment, we lingered. Neither of us wanted to break the spell just yet. We leaned our packs against the truck and watched the horizon burn orange, then fade to rose and lavender. Kyle cracked open a bottle of water and handed it to me. "You realise," he said softly, "that bear probably walked within 10 feet of us last night?" "Closer, maybe," I replied, smiling faintly. "And we never even knew." He laughed under his breath. "Kind of humbling, isn't it?" It was. The thought sat with me like a stone in deep water, solid, grounding. For all our planning and gear and maps, the wilderness still made its own rules. We'd just been guests lucky enough to leave without disturbing the hosts. I thought about the sow again, her steady patience, the cubs tumbling around her feet, the faint shimmer of sunlight off her fur. She'd been powerful, yes, but also peaceful, as if she carried the entire forest's calm inside her. As twilight deepened, the first stars blinked awake overhead. A light wind rustled the trees, carrying the faintest whisper of the day we'd just lived. I found myself wishing I could hold on to that feeling, the quiet awe, the connection, the reminder that wildness isn't something far away, but something we're always standing inside, whether we notice it or not. Kyle rummaged through the cab and pulled out the leftover jerky, offering me a strip. We ate in companionable silence, our eyes drawn again and again to the darkening line of the woods. Somewhere beyond those trees, that bear family was moving under the same sky, their night just beginning as ours wound down. The thought filled me with a strange peace. Before we climbed into the truck, I walked to the edge of the clearing and looked back one last time. The trees stood tall and black against the fading sky, and for a heartbeat I imagined I could hear the low, rhythmic sound of the bear's steps, steady and sure. When I turned back, Kyle was already in the driver's seat, headlights dimmed, waiting. "Ready?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, tightening my jacket. "But I'll tell you what, I'll never forget this one." As the truck rumbled to life and the forest slipped into darkness behind us, I felt that quiet gratitude settle deep in my chest. We'd come looking for a bit of adventure, but what we found was something simpler and far rarer, a reminder that even in silence, the wild world is always watching, and if we're lucky, it lets us watch back.